Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the Complex Trauma Training Center. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Are you a mental health professional looking to deepen your clinical expertise in healing complex trauma? We're thrilled to announce our 2025 NARM therapist trainings designed to provide you with transformative training in the neuroaffective relational model. In 2025, we're offering 3 Level 2 NARM therapist trainings, 2 live online cohorts, and 1 in-person training in Scottsdale, Arizona. Both the in-person Scottsdale training and the spring online cohort begin in January of 2025, and the summer online cohort begins in May of 2025. These NARM therapist trainings consist of 4 weekend modules spread out over the year. Through this advanced clinical training, you'll learn how to confidently and compassionately heal the impact of adverse childhood experiences and CPTSD. You'll gain specialized training in a relationally focused, neurobiologically informed clinical approach that supports the resolution of attachment, developmental, relational, cultural, and intergenerational trauma. And you'll be joining a dynamic community that offers multiple learning opportunities to deepen your professional and personal growth. Enrollment is open to licensed psychotherapists, counselors, social workers, and other licensed mental health professionals, as well as graduate trainees and interns working toward licensure. Visit ComplexTraumaTrainingCenter.com to register for the 2025 NARM therapist training that best fits your schedule. We hope you will join us to learn how NARM can transform your practice. And now for our interview. Jessica Britt has been a student of Hamid Ali's since 1977 and a teacher since 1985. She is a training director for the Diamond Approach, leading ongoing groups in Europe, Canada, and the U.S. In the 1980s, she was on the Gestalt staff of Esalen Institute, creating an integration of Reichian and Gestalt work. While at Esalen, she was a student within the Native American traditions, leading wilderness journeys. Additionally, she studied continuum movement with Emily Conrad. A nurse in the 70s, she specialized in the field of childhood sexual and physical abuse. Jessica continues to practice from a view that includes the whole of the miracle of conscious life. Please enjoy this conversation with Brad Kammer and Jessica Britt.
All right, welcome, Jessica. Thanks for joining us here on Transforming Trauma.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, really happy. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. Your focus is around trauma and spirituality, and there's just so much I'm excited to dive in with you. But first, we like to start off with just asking what you'd hope our listeners would get out of our talk here today.
Such an interesting question, because usually I would frame it, what would you like?
Okay.
And partly because my experience is so broad, really starting in the 1970s, 80s, and from very multiple perspectives, I can kind of go a lot of places. Though when I read what would I like on the email this morning, I think I would like to be inspiring and encouraging to individual people, souls, who have a very traumatic history and can feel cursed by it. I know that place. But to also kind of introduce the possibility of it actually being a portal to knowing oneself in a much more pure, authentic way. I would like to inspire that possibility.
Love it.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm excited. Yeah, I think there's a lot of similar roots in what we do in the NARM work from the Diamond Approach. So I'm really excited to hear more about the work. But first, I'd love to know a little bit about you, your background, how you found this work, how it impacted you. I mean, your whole story. So
But that would take, a 3-hour podcast. I just had my 77th birthday. So, there's a big history.
Yeah. Happy birthday.
Yeah. So the truth is, I come from a very traumatic historical background as a child. There was a lot of abuse in my family of origin, both physical abuse, sexual abuse, just a lot of abuse, plus a lot of medical trauma. So my background has just a lot of trauma in it. So I started basically needing to deal with myself. And I have a kind of interesting route because I kind of went from Freud, which helped organize my history, Jung, which helped give a larger context of holding, then Gestalt work, which taught me about feelings, Reichian work, which helped me give me a body. Right? And as I was going through this process, I could really feel if one has a good enough amount of curiosity, support, a certain kind of courage, and a kind of ruthless desire to get to the real. I sometimes call us the children who know the emperor has no clothes on.
Mm.
And so there's some of us that just know that something's off from a very, very young age and kind of go on a movement. So I was on that movement. And then I met Hamid Ali, my spiritual teacher. And what was really quite amazing is that I actually met him looking for a Reichian therapist. So I did not meet him as a spiritual teacher. I wanted to do a very deep, somatically, emotionally intuned therapy. So what I appreciated about meeting him is that, how do I want to say this? Over my therapeutic process, I learned to have my feelings. I learned to become somatically present. I was very dissociated, right? I really landed here. And I had this just very strange feeling. Like I had these things. I knew my history, my feelings, my body, but something was still missing. It was a very interesting feeling. I must have been in my 30s. And working with Hamid and doing the breath work, which is what we do, he called my attention in a new way. So, for example, I would be feeling anger on the mat, right? Expressing the anger, which was a big step for me, actually. And then he would, at the end of it, he'd say, okay, now as you're sitting here, the anger in a certain way had been discharged. What do you notice? And he really brought my attention to what was present within and after the anger. And I don't know if that makes sense. So he said, well, what do you feel? I said, well, I feel warm. Okay. He said, what else do you notice? Well, I actually feel a little more full in my body. Oh, I feel a little bit more substantial, which over time, I mean, I'm giving a very short little thing. I started recognizing as a presence of what we would call spiritual strength, which in a certain way was freed up through the working with the emotion of anger. Like we think of fire, right? Kind of alchemized and revealed the underlying spiritual quality of strength. That got my attention, right? And then I kind of really got that he used the psychological, he used the somatic, he absolutely trusted going into the feelings deeply, not just to discharge them, but to truly be present with, and then slowly to notice what is this that is present with, which opened up the spiritual door that our consciousness or our soul has a essential living presence that's more fundamental than the history. Right? And through, I just flashed on, I can remember Hamid once saying to me, I was in some kind of dissociative state. I mean, this is like I was in my 20s when I started working with him and my 30s. And he said, well, where are you exactly? I said, where am I? What do you mean, where am I? He said, well, what are you aware of? And so I started describing some kind of space, whatever, I was dissociated, And then he kind of pointed out, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget, he said, there's no place but true nature. There's no place but essence. There's no place but, right, taking forms, so that even when you're dissociated, even though you're not recognizing where you are, you're still in true, it's weird to say, you're still in true nature. And then I recognized, because I was also working with people with trauma histories. I used to be a psychiatric nurse.
Okay.
And I used to work in the late 70s with a clinic it was for children and adolescents who had experienced sexual and physical abuse in San Francisco. So I was working in the field early, right? But to recognize, there's some people who dissociate into space. I used to call those the angel people. Right? And then there's some people who dissociate into the jungle or under the rock. Right. And so I became fascinated with, where are people actually dissociating and what is that place, which sometimes opened up to a quality of true nature that I could then invite them bringing down into their process. Does that make sense what I'm pointing to?
It does. It
Right?
does. I know what I'm about to ask is an impossible question, but I'm going to do it anyways.
Yeah.
Can you give us a sense of what true nature is? Could you give us a definition? I knew it was
No,
going to be
I'm
impossible.
allowing. No, I just taught a weekend and I was just contemplating all these words, consciousness and awareness and presence. Oh boy. Well, one of the gifts of the diamond approach, right, is that we start off with recognizing presence within its qualities. Meaning, like when I said the strength story,
Mm-hmm.
that was not a muscle strength. And as a person learns to tolerate expanding their sensing awareness, one can begin to make a distinction. Oh, this strength I'm feeling is not actually because I've been to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
It's something underneath. So that we would call a quality of presence, consciousness. Another really good one is compassion, right? So without compassion as a spiritual quality, you can only go so deep because the pain and suffering is intense. And it's, when we were infants and toddlers and teenagers, the intensity of sensation through the body is one layer of sensation. But a part of the intensity of the sensation is the sensitivity of our souls, is the sensitivity of our living consciousness, which is combined with the body, creates a meeting of what we call sensation, and there are grades of sensation.
Yeah.
Right? So pain, there's psychic pain, there's physical pain, there's spiritual pain. To really be present with it, you either need a person who's really holding a kind, compassionate heart that is willing to be with you no matter what you're experiencing. For a trauma, a person who's experienced extensive trauma, that is so important. Like you can't waver. And my gift, my blessing is Dick Price,
Mm-hmm.
the founder of Esalen, was my Gestalt therapist trainer. And his steadfastness, you knew if you entered hell, he would be right by your side.
Uh-huh.
That's a very, not to fix it, but
Yeah.
to really be that's a very particular capacity.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't have it, truthfully. Hamid had it, right? So to feel that presence and to feel his loving kindness and Dick Price's right there gives the person the courage to feel their own whatever, right? Which will, over time, open up your own inner compassion center so that you yourself can start feeling kind towards yourself. That's not always so easy because if you feel compassion, you're going to feel more pain. The two kind of go together, right? So that's why then that takes the courage, So all these spiritual qualities over time, my own experience was, this is wild. Like there's really a transformation process happening. I could feel it inside myself. And so then I felt inspired. When I lived at Esalen, I did some groups for people with abuse histories for a few years because I was just so inspired. I wanted to really kind of create a space. It touches me to say it. To create a space where people would feel really okay to start coming present into their experience in a really deep way. Right? Now, over time, as you get those qualities, true nature, I haven't forgotten your original question, true nature begins to show itself as a quality of your awareness, consciousness, that it just has a sense of peace and purity to it and simplicity. Like there's not active mind, there's not a lot of emotions, there's just kind of a quietude, a kind of simplicity, a kind of purity, right? Another story comes, right, from my own personal experience when I was working on something very deeply with Hamid. I mean, it was deep sorrow, right? And because a lot of people with abuse histories feel damaged in some way,
Yeah.
right? Because the wounds are so ridiculously obscene that if you're identified with your body and your body's been wounded, or you're identified with being the child that's being abused, you either think, well, I must deserve it, I'm broken. There are all these really very unkind thoughts about oneself, right? So I was doing this deep work with Hamid, and all of a sudden I felt this sense of myself that was so pure. It startled me. So innocent, so pure, right? True nature is pure, right? It's got a purity to it. And I just can remember feeling and going, oh my God, he never got to this part of me. That the history never touched this original purity.
Yeah.
To say that I was thrilled is an understatement. I went, wow, if that's true, I'm going to start crying. If that's true for me, that's true for everyone, right? That the original purity is there, one's true nature, one's original consciousness before all the conditioning, before all the layers of story, before the impacts of the contractions on the body and the pulling. Like, what's pulling away? It's not just your body that's pulling away and getting hard and withdrawn. There's a soul there. There's a living being there.
Mm-hmm.
And so spiritual work says that living being is within and beneath all your history. Right. That was a long explanation of what is true nature. I didn't know else. Right?
You could have spoke for another 2 hours and I would have been happy as can be. Yeah, this is feeding my soul right now because this is so much of how I'm oriented. And a lot of our background is actually, pretty similar. I studied a lot with Peter Levine, who also was at Esalen and took a little bit of a different track. And
he did. I studied with him when he was still a Reichian therapist. He was brilliant. I learned so much. I was so sorry he stopped doing breath work. But anyway, he had a different karma to fulfill.
He did. But I know Dick Price was a huge influence on him as well. So yeah, similar lineage. And what I so appreciate about what you're bringing to this conversation, what you've been bringing in your career, and I want to know more about your journey with this, is about, like, you've used the word soul probably 4 or 5 times already. And I mean, we could have a huge conversation about our society and about our world, but let's maybe start with just psychology. And I know so many people that become therapists come into this field because they're seeking this true nature, this connection to their essence or to what we call soul. And yet what they're being, introduced to and trained in is often taking us further and further away from it. So you've been in this field for a long time. And what do we do with this soul? Those of us that are trying to really deepen and create more depth in this field, how do we orient?
Wow, $64,000 question. I contemplated a lot.
Yeah.
I wish there was another word, any of the words I might choose, soul, psyche, like the Europeans in the 18th century and the Greeks, they would more use the word psyche, right? Which got translated into soul, especially between Europe and America, right? The important thing is to take the word soul, which is challenging, out of the religious context. Like when Hamid first started using it, you're your soul. And I grew up Catholic. So for me, soul, who knows what it was? It was someplace collecting my sins.
Yeah.
Right? So I had to get through that. And he said, no, it's actually where you are. It includes your body. It includes your emotions. It includes your consciousness, your instincts. So he said, you could use the phrase living consciousness, that each of us is a location of living consciousness that includes everything about us. So it includes our bodies. You could say that the body is the outer form of the soul. It includes our emotional bodies, our ego emotions, our spiritual emotions. It includes our essence. It includes our instincts, all of it. Right? And in a part of, you could say, the cosmic individuation process, most of us are made to forget our original nature, or we wouldn't individuate. We would just be in the oneness, It's like if you watch children, I love this metaphor, right? A lot of kids hate taking naps around 1.5, 2, 3. I've contemplated how come, right? Lots of reasons, but one reason is they're coming out of the boundless field and they're starting to individuate. And when they go down for a nap, they're gone again. but they're busy individuating. Right? And so to kind of individuate and become this unique person, you have to forget your God nature in a funny kind of way, right? Right. So this wave that you are is this living consciousness. This there's so many words for it. Is basically your soul, and it includes everything. I could say living being. I mean, actually, like living being, living consciousness.
Yeah, it reminds me of the word vitality that was also used in Europe.
Yes,
our aliveness. Yeah,
right, and that our aliveness is more fundamental than our biology. Our love nature is more fundamental than our organic or psychological heart, right? But the doorway through the diamond approach is to go through the specifics of a particular history and honor it as a certain kind of, well, the form has been made, right? We go through our individuation process. Now it's time for the form to open up.
Yeah.
Right. And integrate its original nature into its unique, specific unfoldment.
In the diamond approach, what do you call that process? Do you have a name for that?
Well, the integration process, one of the words we use is the pearl. The pearl is, Hamid has a book on the pearl. It's the personal beingness, that you can feel yourself as a unique personalness, independent of your history, giving you your unique personalness. We call it the second individuation process, right? So the first individuation process is what we all go through, and we get our names. Brad, you know, with Jessica, you know, we get, okay, this is right. And then there's that. Now the gift and the challenge of a trauma history, right, is that I'm sure you see this in many of your clients, that people with a certain kind of history, some are really just give up and they don't come see you.
Yeah.
The ones that come see you or come see me or get involved with the diamond approach, there's something moving in them that knows something else is possible. Right? Something, and that we would say feels like it's you knowing something is possible, but we would say actually it's your deeper soul that is pushing you to know something that is more about you. And you're going to have to chew through your history to get to it. Right. Especially if you're really interested in living a personal life. Like Eastern traditions, they're not so interested in the personal.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have flown for me. Right. You know, and so anyway, obviously I'm a chatter.
Oh, I love this. Okay, but okay, so you brought up now I have a practical question, because you're a therapist as well.
I used to be a therapist. Now I just function as a diamond approach teacher.
Okay. However you want to answer this is fine. I'm going to ask it about a therapist, but how would a therapist who's working in the field of trauma integrate the diamond approach so that they could also be inviting this level of consciousness in the work?
A couple of things come to me. One is to really do your own inner work so that there is a kind of fearless presence inside of you. You can go to hell and not be overwhelmed. You can actually be with the sensitivity or the rage or whatever needs to move. So whatever your inner, right? Because a lot of the trauma work, which I think is very, very beautiful, it's not where my background is. You know, I was in those old meetings in the 80s with Dick and Peter and Lisbeth, you know, and all those, right? But a lot of the work, in a good way, has been focusing on healing the nervous system in a certain way. Very useful. I've done hours of body work. Very helpful. I mean, I'm right there for it, right? Craniosacral work, acupuncture, anything that will help relax the hindbrain, right? And ease the limbic brain. Totally for it, right? And some people might choose that path, but that's not been my path. Right? My path has really been engaging deeply, letting the living consciousness tell its story and feel its way through the story to get to the other side of it. Like, I'll give an example from myself. I was an easy crier. Anger was very hard for me, right? And anyway, one day I had this dream, and it had a very angry person in the dream. I was in a training group with Dick Price, and he wanted me to work on the dream. And I said, no, I don't want to work on the dream, right? And he said, "You're working on the dream." Because I knew he was going to have me become the really angry person in the dream, which of course he did, was some kind of giant. And I did. I became the angry person in the dream. It was probably maybe even till now, the most anger I've ever felt. It was one of these Esalen Gestalt, there were 5 people holding me. I was like enraged, right? It was so brilliant. And Dick was right there, right? And in the middle of it, my inner, even though I was raging and pissed, I suddenly realized I was angry, but I was not anger. I was angry, but I was not anger. That put chills through my soul, my consciousness. I had been avoiding feeling the anger because I thought it meant my identity, was a killer.
Yeah.
And only by feeling the anger deeply with a lot of presence, a part of my consciousness was totally in the anger, but a part of my consciousness suddenly went, well, this is definitely an experience I'm having. No question. I'm pissed, but it's not me. That is a subtle little distinction, right?
Yeah, a certain form of disidentification with the emotion or the energy of anger.
Recognizing it wasn't my identity, it was a phenomena I was experiencing.
Yeah.
Right? So I wasn't dissociated.
Yes.
I was recognizing, another way we could say it was, I was more than the anger.
Exactly.
Right? I was more. So that was very inspiring. That made me a lot more fearless around, the alchemy potential of really being with deep feelings. Now, I think one of the challenges, getting back to your question, it takes a lot of a certain kind of training to really be with someone's emotions deeply, right? It's not so easy to really hold that. So like where I live, there are a lot of therapists around where I live. It's not really easy for people to really feel their feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let alone that, right? Let alone really deep feelings, allowing them to transform. And one of the questions I have, I am one lucky being. I lived at Esalen and was under Dick Price's tutelage for 5 years. I mean, right? I've been working with Hamid for like 40 years. I mean, I am very lucky. Most people, I don't know where most people can get the learning and get the practitioners who will really be with them in a really deep way that will give their clients the confidence to feel what feels like the unfeelable, right? And when you're dealing with trauma, so one of the first things that I think is really relevant that both Hamid and Dick Price really focused on was working with the inner critic, that part of us that's really unkind to us.
Yeah, it's the opposite of compassion. It's attacking ourselves.
Right. So even to really work on helping people create space around their inner critic or the superego, I think is a huge step. So I think the therapist needs to be kind of fearless, their feet solid on the ground, their butt in the dirt, kind of really, because one of the challenges is that the trauma hits the young child at every octave. So it hits them emotionally, physically. Like I wasn't beaten, my brother was, but I witnessed it. And in a very deep session with Hamid, where I had a blockage in my belly center, wasn't going there. And I get tearful. I realized that I was feeling so much wounding in my belly center. I literally, psychically felt every punch my stepfather threw. I felt every one of them. Now, to even open that up took a lot of presence to be present with it and let myself grasp, oh my God, I felt all that. No wonder my belly center is all withdrawn, right? So that I can see on one level why the trauma community in a certain way has gone from focusing on the details of the history in a certain kind of way and focusing on teaching people how to regulate themselves in daily life. In a certain way, it's a little easier than actually taking the deep dive with somebody, right? So, and I don't know how to address that.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you brought something up that is exactly where I am at my point in my career as a teacher and trainer is, I mean, and it makes sense. So many therapists, particularly, newer in our career, are looking for models. They're looking for techniques and approaches and skills and tools. And then I'm resonating exactly what you're sharing here is at some point you realize that those things are secondary at best. And that really it's the training that you're speaking to is about our own inner development. It's our own inner capacity. And I think that that's where it's like you're saying, it's very hard to find quote trainings that are really focused on this deeper capacity that we need to, midwife someone through this process that you're talking about.
Exactly. And I love I sometimes say, Hamid, you're the scientist, right? And I'm the midwife. We're quite different in character, right?
Yeah.
And yes, it is a midwifery process, and it's a very hands-on in a certain kind of way. So to make oneself a vehicle for holding that does mean you've kind of dealt with some of the deep forces in your own consciousness and feel some ease and some inner practice of how to be and value, like, oh, this is a good thing that you're feeling this. Mm-hmm. It will be okay. Mm-hmm. Like just realized this, both Hamid and Dick Price always conveyed, it's going to be okay. I'll share this little vignette with Hamid and myself.
Please.
It was in the 1980s, right? And I was in one of these places where I was feeling totally pointless. It was one of these existential moments. And I had a session with Hamid and I go, oh, good, I'm going for a session. I'll do some breathing and then I will feel really good afterwards, right? So you know how that is.
Yes.
So I walked in, I lie on the mat, I'm breathing. He said, what do you, I said, I feel empty. I feel totally pointless. He says, keep breathing. I feel empty, totally keep breathing, right? Okay. 45 minutes later, whatever it was, he goes, okay, see you in 2 weeks. And I sat up because I'm still feeling empty and pointless. And I looked at him and I was shyer back then. I mean, this is like 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. But I gave him a look like, you got to be kidding me. But anyway, I was a good girl, Yeah. In later years, I would say, you've got to be kidding me. But I didn't say it that day. I got up, I walked out. I didn't believe it. And I'm walking, I'm going, I can't believe this just happened. He's letting me walk out feeling empty and pointless. I walked to the corner store that had great ice cream. I got myself an ice cream. And as I'm standing there waiting for the ice cream, I go, oh my God. Now I've been working with him maybe 3 or 4 years, right? So we had a solid relationship. I said, oh my God, he has total trust in the process. Mm. He feels totally okay sending me out into the world like I came in, empty and pointless. And I felt this profound holding of being with empty and pointless that I kind of went skipping down the road with my ice cream, and who knows what happened. I don't remember what happened next, but I realized that he really trusted it was going to be okay. Mm. He didn't hypermanage the situation or make me have something else or, right? It was really quite something as a transmission.
Yeah, which again is kind of the opposite of what we were talking about before about like trying to learn all these skills and tools to help regulate people, which again, there's a place for that.
Definitely.
But I'm also hearing this deeper training, quote unquote, about our capacity to hold these deeply human states and places.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think that's when you ask me what would I like, to inspire, what I find myself saying to a lot of students lately when, because our work goes very deep. People do very deep work, right? And what I've been noticing, and some people have been doing deep work for years, that there's a new layer of a different level of identity coming to the surface in a lot of people, even younger layer, right? Because we have all these identities. And I'm recognizing that even though my students, many of them have been practitioners for 20, 30 years, have all kinds of essential experiences, know themselves and all, there's still this huge piece that doesn't get touched by the realizations, by the experiences. I find that fascinating. Who and what in there doesn't want to get touched, right? And not to feel guilty about it, not to push it away, but let's create some space for the one who doesn't want to be touched. And what I'm realizing that one of those places that doesn't want to be touched is a very young place in us who has lost trust in reality.
Yeah.
Not lost trust in mom and dad, it's deeper.
Yes.
Lost trust in God, lost trust in reality. Even though there's a place that obviously trusts and they're having all these divine experiences, but that's not touching the place. And so to create this space, to allow the mistrust to have space, to say its point of view. And in a certain way, I think at the heart of the alchemy process is letting all the sub-voices tell their story emotionally, somatically, essentially. Back to children again. You know, children have a bad moment in school. They come and tell it to you, and if you really listened to them, 5 minutes later, they're on to the next thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Most of us, a lot of our soul stories have not really, we've gotten good at telling the story verbally, right? We're getting better at telling it with feelings. Some are beginning to tell it and actually be somatically present. That's a little, well, it's very sensitive. It takes a certain skill set, which we don't teach people, actually.
No, a lot of people are afraid of going into their bodies. So,
Yeah, well, because it's so sensitive.
Yeah.
Because the soul is so sensitive. Consciousness is sensitive. Yeah, I'm feeling the sensitivity of consciousness right now. I lost my train of thought. It's totally cool. Oh.
Yeah, you're talking about the capacity to go into these deeper levels and hold them for ourselves so that we can hold them with other people. And at the risk of taking this really rich, depthful conversation in a different direction,
That's all right.
Another maybe impossible question to ask you, but how do you define what the diamond approach actually is? Like for people that don't know anything about this, how would you define it? How does it get applied? I mean, giving us just some practical understanding of the diamond approach.
Well, the simplest explanation is that it's an adventure in consciousness.
Oh, I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
In the beginning of the work, Hamid never used the word spiritual. He didn't like it because he said it's so misused and people don't know what they're saying.
Yeah.
Right. But he's an adventure in consciousness. So his beginning years, he was from Kuwait and he came to Berkeley to get his PhD in quantum physics, the nature of reality. And while in Berkeley in the 70s and late 60s, the nature of reality was a subject that was coming alive in Berkeley, right? And he realized that the quantum world was not going to really satisfy his soul, his consciousness around what's the nature of consciousness. So he started adding Buddhist meditation. He was in a Gurdjieff group, so that it's really a kind of adventure into what is the state of reality. What is reality? What is true nature? What is consciousness? That's the broad thing. The difference about the diamond approach, because a lot of spiritual teachings will point to the large transcendent view, open the view, right? And people can have, big views, but then they come back to their historical view. It's very difficult to integrate.
Yeah.
Right? In the diamond approach, we kind of point to big view, but we say we're going to start with exactly what you're experiencing right here locally. So what are you experiencing literally right now? What are your thoughts literally right now? What are your feelings? And so that part of the work looks a little psychodynamic because we use psychology so that the living consciousness, which is taking itself to be a particular history, classical spiritual language, instead of rejecting the history, we say, great, let's go into that history. How did you get that view? Tell me about that view. Oh, your mother was like that, so you started feeling like that? And we actually open up the building blocks of the personality so that the soul, the living consciousness, can begin to feel, itself other than the history, like, oh, that's why I made that choice. Now, the one saying, oh, that's right, or, oh, my mother feels this way about me, but actually that's not the truth, right? To just kind of open up and as that opens up and all kinds of feelings, like I was pointing out before, then the spiritual qualities start showing themselves because of the depth of the inquiry. So we have this whole inquiry method, which I'm not going to go into right now. It's too much for the moment. That opens up, right? And so even the word we use for the personality, we sometimes use the word shell.
Yeah.
Right? Well, you think of it as an oyster shell, and that inside that shell, there's a pearl developing, being rubbed on. And at a certain moment, the shell will get more transparent. You'll slowly recognize, oh, I'm not that shell, and then the pearl or the true essence will start emerging. Is that helpful?
Very helpful. Yeah. So it's like a phenomenological inquiry process, it sounds like.
Oh, thank you for using that big word.
Yeah.
No, I'm a little auditorily dyslexic. So there's certain words I have trouble literally saying since I was little, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
But that's one of Hamid's favorite words.
Great. Yeah, study of consciousness in real time, which has Gestalt and somatic elements, of course, to that, but holding kind of a larger invitation of exploration around consciousness, which I love. I love that language around that.
Right. And even without even necessarily getting involved in the diamond approach, but there's certain meditation practices that are really useful for some people who have historical trauma to develop the capacity to be mindful and present, not as a means of dissociation, but as a resource to apply to the history. Now, some people use it as a dissociation and just give me the transcendence and I'm cool here. I don't need to deal with that. That's a choice, right? Now, for some people, meditation is impossible because to sit still for 15 minutes makes you a target. Impossible. So for those people, maybe movement, mindful movement, right? So to begin to recognize what spiritual practices are actually useful for a person without shame and supportive, and which ones are counterindicated, which I don't think is in a discussion. I don't think people talk about that. Like, why do some people have trouble meditating?
Yeah.
Now, other people with trauma histories, meditating is like bliss. They go down, they sit, they go into silence, and man, they're
gone. Yeah.
Whatever. They're like in their safe zone.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the people I call hiding under the rock in the backyard, right? And then there are other people where to sit, and meantime, they're feeling terrible about not being able to meditate.
Yeah, beat themselves up for that, yes.
Without understanding the intelligence of not wanting to sit. And then how you work with a person to go, okay, that was in the past if you were the target for your brother or whoever, and you wanted to keep moving. And to help them create a safe sitting spot. Anyway, to how to work with that without basically the superego again, working with that critical, as I'm talking, I just realized, my God, there's just so much to the subject, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're probably going to have to schedule a follow-up to get deeper, but just a couple kind of wrapping up questions here.
Sure.
So you teach on trauma and spirituality.
Well, actually, I'd say it this way.
Okay.
I teach the diamond approach as a particular awakening maturation teaching. I don't specifically focus on trauma as such because most of our teachers are not trained in that. And through the Diamond Approach website, I did a couple of weekends on spirituality and trauma. And I started thinking recently that maybe I should bring my past into the present, that I have something to offer in the trauma field around spirituality and trauma that no one's really addressing. So I'm kind of moving in that direction more publicly, like talking with you, right?
Yeah.
But it's all that knowledge is always with me when I'm working with someone.
Okay. And so for people that are interested, like in the diamond approach, you don't have to be a psychotherapist or any kind of practitioner to be part of that. Is that correct?
Oh, no. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no. Whole range. You have to be very curious and want to get to the bottom of it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so for people, because, we're talking to people that are either working with or have experienced a lot of their own trauma. So for people that are, nervous about spiritual communities, how can we talk about what's happening in the Diamond Approach communities in a way that might make them feel safe to
Oh, sweet.
to
No, I
explore?
appreciate it. I mean, we have students who have been in some rough spiritual communities,
Yeah.
and I appreciate the meaning of that. One of the freest things about the Diamond Approach, you can leave anytime you want. No one blinks an eye.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If you've been in the work for, let's say, working with a teacher for 10 years and you want to stop, I'm certainly going to ask what's going on. And,
Sure.
you're like, I just had somebody leave one of my groups and they're being called to something else. I said, super, go.
Mm-hmm.
So there's none of that. There's no clinging to anybody.
Yeah, not having to identify as
Oh my goodness, no.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, no.
And then in the learning, is it in group form? Is it individual? Is it all the above? What's it actually look like?
It's mostly all of the above. I mean, if someone really gets enchanted, you can always start with the books to see because it's very detailed. I mean, it gets very specific.
Mm-hmm.
And some people really love it, and some people are totally turned off by that. A really interesting book for someone to read, I think, is one of Hamid's first books called Essence.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very interesting book. And anyway, there's lots of books, but that's an easy book to read. But the format is basically you work with a private teacher anywhere from 6 to 10 times a year. You're in a group that has a particular teaching unfoldment, and you get a talk, and then you get an exercise, a repeating question or a monologue to work the material. So it's not just you're just listening to someone. How did this talk, actually affect me? Which makes it much more immediate, brings it into the immediacy. And then if you're in an ongoing group, that ongoing group has small groups. So like 10, 12 people meet anywhere from 10 to 6 times a year and just do inquiry together with the teacher and support each other. And that becomes like your little pod. Right.
I like that.
Yeah, basically. And so it depends on the group. And some groups meet only on weekends. Some groups meet twice a year in retreat format and then have in between small groups to just keep the thread going. So there's different kind of formats. Mm-hmm. Some groups are in person. Some groups are now hybrid now because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. If you get cooked, if you like it, you really like it.
So someone that's been listening and already is intrigued, where would they go to start to explore the different options about getting involved?
Probably to the website.
Great. And we'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Well, this has been such a pleasure, and I really am excited for hopefully a next conversation with you. And just, thanks for all the work you've been doing over these years, and just, bringing, this capacity for depth into our society, which we're losing more and more, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And thanks for sharing it to us in our community. We have a lot of people that, like I said, have come into this profession, are looking for something, have not found it yet. And so we're trying in the work that we teach to bring this in. And I have a lot of Hamid's books.
Have you read the Essence book?
That one I do not have.
What you might like about it, since you're a somatic practitioner, is at the beginning of the book, he defines the different layers of experience: mental, emotional, physical, somatic. And he goes through them in a very neat kind of way that you might appreciate as a resource.
Great.
To language for new students.
I'm going to purchase it. I'll tell you, the one thing that I really dove deep in the last couple of years into is his series on narcissism.
Of course.
And that's something I'd love to talk to you about another time, because we teach a lot, of course, on narcissism.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, we'll send you, and I can send you a book. I'm happy to share with you about our model.
Oh, great. No, that would be super.
Yeah.
That would be super. Yeah, narcissism, well, that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah.
But so, that purity that I was describing, that I felt, that's moving towards what we call the point. Right? Now, I was feeling the purity, but I wouldn't say at that moment I was feeling like, oh my God, that's me. Mm-hmm. I was more feeling it as, oh my God, there's purity there that's never been touched. Right? So I wasn't right in it as, oh, that's the point, or that's the beingness, or that took a little bit more.
And I think that the books about narcissism, I think, were called The Point of Existence.
Right. That's what we call it, the point.
Oh, wow.
Because when you feel it, the question of meaning disappears. Plus, it can manifest like a point of light inside the consciousness. But the feeling it's just all the questions are just gone. There's just the purity of the being is enough, basically.
Well, that's a great place to leave our listeners with. Jessica, thank you so much. I really have very much enjoyed our conversation and getting to know you, and excited to hear the feedback from people that are listening. And yeah, I do hope we can have you back on at some point.
Yeah,
so thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed myself. As I said, I can be a chatty one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more information about our guest, check the show notes or visit us at complextraumatrainingcenter.com/transforming trauma. You can also connect with us in other ways. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. As a mental health professional, your commitment to healing and growth inspires us. We at the Complex Trauma Training Center are committed to supporting you in your well-being and success. That's why we're honored to invite you to our Space Program 2025, an inner development program of support and self-discovery for therapists on the personal, interpersonal, and transpersonal levels. Running over 6 online sessions in 2025, this interactive experiential learning program is designed to support self-care and self-discovery for therapists, exploring internally, relationally, and transpersonally. CTTC faculty will welcome you into a professional community of therapists that are seeking to create greater effectiveness and resilience in our professional lives. As CTTC faculty Brad Kammer says, the intent is that this program will help us not only become more effective therapists, but also love our work more. Please visit complextraumatrainingcenter.com and secure your spot in the 2025 Space Program. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Elisa Sponseller for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.